Hello. I want to talk about identity politics. Now, I've probably touched on this before, but this video I want to be very specific about this subject. Summed up, I think it is absolute, in its worst form, poison. I really do believe it is divisive and potentially dangerous. So, what's the context of this? Why do I want to discuss this? Well, the BBC had, I believe it was the BBC, had a segment on explaining the word youthquake. Apparently, it's been chosen as the word of the year, in part because a lot of young people helped galvanise the re-election of Jeremy Corbyn actually last year. He done better than expected in the British general election of this year. Um, at some point, I may get round to making that cheat. In fact, it's right in front of me, so I'll just if I get round to it, I may discuss this. Yeah, so anyway, Youthquake has been chosen as the word of the year, but they had like a 3 or 4 minute segment explaining this. And there was this interview, and I'm not sure who she was, but this black lady was saying white privilege is a helpful term, because it lets us define the problem. Um, Now, this mindset is something that really epitomizes identity politics, and that is namely that at its core, identity politics is seeing yourself and the rest of the world through the prism of a demographic that is beyond your control. No one gets to choose their skin color, right? But to those who promote identity politics, they don't see themselves as a person. They see themselves as a black person, as a black woman, as a gay black woman, whatever the case might be. And you could, switch it around for whatever. I just think that it's what it does is it treats people not as individuals, but as demographic blocks. It simplifies complex situations. So when I hear this garbage put out, white privilege this, white privilege that, quite honestly, it infuriates me. And this is why. Those who promote the term will deny this, but what they are really doing is stirring up animosity and suspicion of all white people. Because they're saying to black people and to South Asian people and so on that the white people have everything. They're princes and princesses of privilege. And the word privilege is really problematic because it insinuates you have something for nothing. It insinuates a comfortable, luxurious lifestyle. Now, I defy anybody watching this video, especially if you live in the UK, to tell me, hand on heart, that you have never seen a poor white person. You see, to me, it's not about them being white or black or Asian. I've seen homeless people from all ethnicities. God honest truth. I see them as homeless people, as being on the margins of our society. But the problem with identity politics is it tribalizes people. That's why I despise it. And quite frankly, if you define yourself by your skin color, I would say you're a pretty shallow person. So if you define yourself solely as a black person, you're pretty boring. You're pretty boring. I wouldn't define myself as a white person. Now, I've heard an excuse for this, which is racism forces me to think about race. Well, if put it this way, if you're the victim of a racist attack, that's awful. My heart goes out to anyone who's been in that situation. It's a horrible thing to go through, and there is a real problem with racism. I get that. There are white thugs who target minority people. It's wrong. There are also examples of anti-white racism. And it isn't just about name calling, there are actual physical attacks. There's been examples of them. But the thing about identity politics, it's not really interested in truth or fairness. It's interested in putting people into these little blocks. Race is the most prominent aspect of this, but to some extent also gender and sexual orientation, men and women, and to a lesser extent, gay people, straight people, transgender people, etc. But I would say the race thing is the most prominent. It infuriates me. I mean, I'm no prince of privilege. I might not be living in rags, but I am not. I've struggled. I know what that means. And I'm not jealous of anyone. I'm not blaming anyone. But when I hear these identitarians pushing this idea, you cannot talk about racism because you're white, go to hell. Um, Put it this way, anybody who looks at me in a negative way for no other reason than my skin color, I will take issue with that person. I don't care who they are. Um, but what infuriates me, to be quite honest, is not only infuriates me, it concerns me, is that big, powerful networks like the BBC are actively promoting this and they're not offering an alternative viewpoint. So they are failing to have impartiality. It's been very clear for a very long time that the BBC has a left wing bias. Now, to be fair, you can point out certain media conglomerates that have a blatant right wing bias, the tabloid press, but they don't push identity politics, and that's something that is, I believe, a huge problem. Um, I mean, I'll say this, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I hate the Sun, right? The tabloid newspaper, the Sun. But to be fair to it, and I can't believe I'm saying that because I really don't like it, but after the 7/7 bombings, they had this page and it was full of British people from all ethnicities, all backgrounds, saying that they were British. In the 1980s, I believe, might have been the 70s, can't remember exactly, but the Conservatives had an election poster with a black guy in the picture. It said, to the Conservatives, he is black. To Labour, no, excuse me. To the Conservatives, he is British. To Labour, he is black. And the point that poster was making was that the left really push these divisive identity politics. What the left does is keep people in a victimhood mindset. It constantly tells people you are a victim of whatever. Now, I'm a realist. Society is not fair and it's not equal, and there is injustice out there. God knows there is injustice out there. And I don't have blinders on to this. I'm a huge critic of Tory austerity cuts. I do believe there's real damage being caused there. And I do think the right is in denial about a lot of the problems. And I do think they have blinkers on to a lot of these things. But, it isn't even about left versus right because there is an aspect of the left that is down to earth and they can see that this is not particularly helpful to people. I've known left leaning people who don't pander to identity politics. I just believe. I mean, look what's happening in the United States. It's sad, and yes, a big part of that is Trump's populism, but the intolerance of the left, particularly in the United States, is disgusting. When you have gangs and mobs of people violently trying to shut down debate, that's what it is, and it disgusts me that the likes of CNN and BBC will not report this. Or if they do report it, the lack of balance is absolutely abhorrent. And it really infuriates me because it hurts everyone, actually. It hurts black people, it hurts minority people by telling them constantly, you are a victim. You must mistrust the white people because they have all the privilege. And white liberals who pander to this, who basically want to bow their head in, shame, they're idiots because all they're doing is adding to the division by pandering to that mindset. I will never, ever, ever apologize for something that I have not personally done. I will acknowledge history, and I do think white people need to acknowledge there has been institutional white racism. I get that, but something like white privilege, it is such a toxic and divisive term because what you're basically saying, and I've heard people deny this, oh, we're not saying it's all white. Yeah, but you are. That's the point. It is, whatever way you look at it, a generalizing term. white privilege. The truth is there is division in society, there is economic divisions without question. But you get some hotshots black or Indian lawyer in London is going to have, the chances are, a much more privileged life than some homeless white guy in, I don't know, Leeds, whatever. But that isn't the point. The point here is that we're talking about individuals. And why I despise identity politics so much is it creates suspicion between people. And if you challenge it, then you're automatically accused of being far right. This is the mindset of regressive leftists. And I'm not talking about all left wing people. I'm talking of people who have that particular mindset that if you don't see their worldview exactly, then you're some sort of white nationalist. The white nationalists are idiots. They're boneheads, and they are, in the worst case scenario, they're very, very despicable people, and they are capable of violence. So yeah, we should be vigilant to that threat. But I honestly believe a lot of it is reactionary to the insufferable divisiveness caused by the regressive left. I do believe that. Um, and it's sad. It really is. Because there isn't a level playing field in terms of trying to get the point out there that it's not about you as a black person or you as a white person or you as a gay person or you as a straight person. It's about individuals. If someone has suffered racism, they have my sympathy. But that doesn't give them an excuse to mistrust and hate all white people. And I think for too long, black racists have got away with too much. They've got away with sweeping statements that white racists wouldn't get away with. Why is that acceptable? And why does the likes of the BBC give them a platform to promote this divisiveness unchallenged? That's what I find abhorrent. It's not that they're having their point of view, it's that that point of view isn't being challenged because of cowardly um, white regressive leftists whose worldview is shaped by a sense of shame and a sense of intolerance. It's actually a very toxic combination when you get down to it. People who believe in microaggressions combined with the rage of the mob, you have a very dangerous individual there because that's someone who promotes this nonsense. And I can honestly say I have friends from all backgrounds, and I don't care if that sounds like a cliche, it's just the truth. Um, I honestly treat people as individuals. So if you're a black person, I see you as a person. The fact you're black is a side factor, it's not here or there. But if you then use your blackness to define yourself and you treat me like, oh, this white guy is can't have his opinion because he's white, then I have no respect for you. Simple as that. And this is why I'm so skeptical of Black Lives Matter because they epitomize everything that is wrong with identity politics. They haven't done a damn thing to build bridges. All they have done is said, for example, the problem with police brutality, which is a real problem, is something that only affects black people. Not true. There are white people killed by the police, there are Hispanic people killed by the police. But by saying Black Lives Matter, they're saying only Black Lives Matter. They deny this. But if you dig deep down to the movement, I don't believe every single activist with Black Lives Matter is a black supremacist, but I do believe there is some very troubling logics behind this. But what does the left wing media do? It holds it up as some sort of inspiring movement. What's inspiring about throwing Molotov cocktails, setting cars on fire? That's not inspiring. And what troubles me is, as a response to this, then the ugly aspect of the right, the regressive right, let's put it that way, then rises as a response to this. So the two extremes are feeding off each other. And those of us who are stuck in the middle, who try to keep our mindset down to good, down to earth, realistic principles, it can be quite depressing seeing this. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But I just find it really troubling. And I have to say, if I ever get into public life, I don't know whether I will or won't. But if I ever do, I hope I would have the courage of conviction not to pander to this sort of mindset, because I really do believe it divides people. Well, another example of this, I'll close with this point, is the gender wage gap. That's something we constantly hear from the feminist movement. The gender wage gap. It's scaremongering because that leads women to believe, not all women, because not all women are stupid, but it leads women to believe, oh, you're being treated less than a man. So it's scaremongering. It's saying when we hear constantly papers plaster out the gender wage gap, the fact is the vast majority of jobs, men and women are paid exactly the same. And there may be areas that are not perfect, but there is a lot of factors to take into consideration to do with the hours that are put in, the workload. There's a lot of issues going on. I believe absolutely that men and women should be paid the same for the same work. What the gender wage gap propaganda fails to mention is that in the vast majority of work, men and women are paid the same. In fact, in some fields, it could be argued women are paid more. Look at that vice chancellor of Bath University, Britain's smallest university, being paid 4 times as much as the prime minister. She's a woman. That's hardly. So I really think that we really need to be wary of identity politics. It's poison. And anyone, in fact, I would argue classical liberals more than anyone should be wary about this because it divides people. I would also speculate, I'm only speculating, but if Martin Luther King was still alive, I think he would be speaking out against this mindset. Because what was it Dr. King said? He said, I dream of a day when little black boys and little black girls will join hands with little white boys and little white girls. He didn't say, I dream of a day where little black boys and little black girls will be fearing and suspicious of little white boys and little white girls. That's one of the great things about King. He reached out to people. He didn't polarize people. At least, not those who had common sense and could see what he was doing. It just infuriates me that there are people out there, and it isn't everyone's entitled to their point of view. They can have their point of view. But what I find disgusting is that big, powerful networks give them that platform without offering an alternative point of view, without letting them be challenged. So they're basically being allowed to incite division and suspicion and ultimately hate. They will say, oh, I don't hate white people, but all white people are privileged. Well, what do you take from that? You're saying you don't hate all white people, but you think we're all privileged? That's not a respectful position to have. How do you build bridges if you're telling the other person, you know, it's, at its core, it's divisive, and that's why it must be challenged.